Denver Broncos rookie wide receiver Troy Franklin could pick up right where he left off with Bo Nix as they pair together in a Denver Broncos uniform. What will that look like? We'll break it all down on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much once again to everybody in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there, predominantlyorange.com. And just a reminder, Broncos Country, you can get this podcast for free every single day, all year long, whether you watch us on YouTube or listen wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe or follow so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long. And look, today's episode of the show, we're going to continue our NFL draft profile series. We're focused on Troy Franklin to the Denver Broncos. What are some realistic expectations for him going into 2024? How does he factor into the team's plans as a rookie right away? We're going to have to kick things off with a little bit of a scouting report, a look back at his production at the University of Oregon.
Yeah, and he was tremendous there, obviously, especially after Bo Nix got to campus, right? I mean, those two just started to click immediately, had 14 touchdown catches last year, Cody, obviously, the 81 receptions for over almost 1,400 yards, averaging 17.1 yards per catch. And look, he did this a variety of different ways, right? I think the speed is the clear number one trait for Troy Franklin. I believe he ran a 4.41 in the 40-yard dash. So the speed is real. He's got good, not great size, right? He's about 6'1", 6'2", maybe 180 pounds. So he's kind of built a little on the slender side, but he's got big time speed, quickness off the line of scrimmage. And what he does for you is, and he not only opens up the vertical passing game for the offense, but he opens things up underneath for other guys. That's one thing that I notice a lot is, hey, obviously he was a big part of that Oregon offense, but I believe Bo Nix's, brother, Tez, that he called him. I haven't scouted much of the 2025 draft yet, Cody, but I know his name is Tez.
Tez Johnson.
Tez Johnson, constantly getting open as well. So look, there's a lot to like about Troy Franklin's game and what he brings to the table. I know people are wondering about the fit in Denver as far as like what position is he going to play? How's he going to hold up there? It's not a replacement for anybody necessarily, but I think he's going to be able to carve out a role pretty quickly.
Well, I think one thing you want to look at as well is the things that you mentioned about the crossing patterns. You know, his 17.1 yards per reception. He was a fun player to watch at Oregon the last 2 years. 14 touchdowns last season, as you mentioned, 9 touchdowns the year before. He's just a guy that has ridiculous speed. Now, at the college level, I just remember watching it. He's getting behind defenses. He balled out against Washington's defense, against some of their DBs. Their top cornerback, if I'm not mistaken, just transferred to the University of Oregon as well in this offseason there. So you look at what Franklin was able to do, his release off the line of scrimmage. I mean, often at times if guys are playing press, like he'd find a way to get behind them. The NFL, you have to wonder, can he maintain that at the NFL level? Look, he got 4.41 40-yard dash speed. He is explosive there. You mentioned the 6'2" size. He's got a 39-inch vertical jump there with that 6'2" size there, though, Sayre. And I'll say one thing about him that I really like. Not only is he a guy that can, I think, run across, like if you're running him on crossers or drags or some of those dig route concepts, and some of the routes we saw Jerry Jeudy excel on here in Denver, now obviously a member of the Cleveland Browns, I guarantee you, and I think that Troy Franklin could actually maybe produce a little bit higher in some of these instances. There's a clip going around from the NFL Scouting Combine, right? Remember, it's that catching drill, and he received a lot of criticism from spectators and Twitter analysts and everything along those lines about, well, this guy didn't run a straight line. In what realm in the NFL, when you're going across the field, are you ever really going to run a straight line in the National Football League? I think it was a little overblown there, but, he's a guy that catches everything very, very fast. And I think the Broncos, if they can utilize and have more of a middle-of-the-field passing game this upcoming season, which they didn't have last year, I think they're going to be in a really, really good spot here going forward. Not to mention, reuniting him with Bo Nix, who was his quarterback at Oregon in the past 2 seasons. I want to highlight this, though. You mentioned 81 catches for the 1,300 yards, the 14 touchdowns there. I mean, he was a playmaker here. He had the 3rd most receiving yards in the Pac-12 last year. He had the 6th most receiving yards in the entire NCAA last season. He had the most receiving touchdowns in the Pac-12 in back-to-back years. He had 9 in 2022. He had 14 in 2023, and he had the third most touchdown catches in the NCAA last season. I'm a little surprised he fell a little bit, and I think everybody was wondering, why did he drop? I can tell you this, there aren't any character concerns about a guy like Troy Franklin. That was one thing, and also the Broncos, George Payton, Sean Payton, they pinpointed that's super important to what they want for their team is to get guys who got high character. There was no character concerns about Troy Franklin ever at the University of Oregon. I'm a little curious as to maybe why he fell a little bit in this year's draft.
I am as well. I don't know that anybody expected that at all, right? Because everybody was saying, well, he's definitely going to be a second round pick. All the mock draft scenarios that we had done, people are saying like, man, wouldn't it be cool if the Broncos are going to take Bo Nix? Wouldn't it be cool if they could still get Troy Franklin? But we don't have a second round pick, so that's not going to happen. Well, here we are. We're living in the world. I mean, guess what? When you say something's not realistic before the draft will humble you a little bit and make it realistic because that's what happened. The Broncos get him in the 4th round. And from what Sean Payton and George Payton were saying, they had a hard time passing on him at number 76 overall. And if they had a day 2 grade on this guy, man, Cody, it's such a great value. I mean, we continually bring that up now that the Walton Penner ownership group is in place. The great values abound in Broncos country. So point, and I love this pick from the standpoint of, hey, you get a player that has experience with Bo Nix. These guys have timing when it comes to after the catch. This is an area where, man, the Broncos are going to need to be on point. If they're going to, if you want to have a good, quick passing game, you need to be on point with the guys after the catch. Troy Franklin, he might not be bowling over folks, but man, he's going to be able to give you that quickness and explosiveness once he gets the ball in his hands.
He's a finesse guy. And look, when I watch him play, like try to think like who's a guy that I could watch in the NFL that maybe reminds me of him a little bit, maybe like a Tyler Boyd kind of style there. Like maybe that's what he can bring to the table. Now, obviously, Denver's wide receiver room right now, it has a multitude of players inside of that room. That could obviously change, and obviously different roles could be defined by the time training camp rolls around or even through the first 2 weeks of camp when the preseason then occurs. Where is Troy Franklin going to factor into the team's plans at the wide receiver position? That's something that Sayre Bedinger and myself, Broncos Country, we're going to dive a little bit deeper on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook, and it's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own, because right now, new customers, they get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And for the NBA playoffs in general, the Denver Nuggets will kick off the second round of the playoffs, hosting the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Nuggets, according to FanDuel Sportsbook, are 4.5-point home favorites. So if you believe that Nikola Jokic and the Nuggets are going to take home the victory in Game 1 against Anthony Edwards and the Timberwolves, FanDuel is the perfect place to get in on the action. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook.
Are we going to see Troy Franklin in the mix amongst the Broncos' top receivers this year? Well, Cody and I, we both know that the Broncos need help at the receiver position. They need playmaking at the receiver position, but it could be a little bit of time before we see Troy Franklin out there for a ton of snaps. We're going to talk about that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, but want to say thank you and give a shout out to all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, free and available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, as well as you can join the community on YouTube where things are growing rapidly right now. And Cody, let's talk about rapidly growing as far as the wide receiver room is concerned for the Denver Broncos. I mean, you add Marvin Mims last year. Cortland Sutton has the best year of his NFL career so far. Tim Patrick back in the mix. Lil Jordan Humphrey back. Josh Reynolds now in there. So it's not exactly a clear path to immediate playing time for Troy Franklin, but you can't help but wonder, is his relationship equity with Bo Nix? If Nix is named the starter quickly, does Franklin get on the field quicker? Let's talk about his upcoming potential role here in year 1 for the Denver Broncos.
Well, first off, let's take a look at all the wide receivers that are currently on the Broncos roster right now. Usually, as we've always mentioned here, once you get to around training camp, you're going to have a ton of guys there This right now is the players that are on the roster, not featuring Troy Franklin, obviously still unsigned right now as a draft pick, and obviously not factoring in the undrafted rookie free agents. Michael Bandy coming in at the top of the list, Philip Dorsett, Lil Jordan Humphrey, Brandon Johnson, Marvin Mims, Tim Patrick, Josh Reynolds, David Sills the fifth, and Cortland Sutton and Jalen Virgil. Like, there's a lot of players inside that position room right now. Now you add Troy to the mix. You got a couple of the undrafted rookie free agents, which, look, to be honest with you, I think with how loaded Denver's wide receiver room is right now with other guys there, I don't think you're going to see a wide receiver make the 53 from the undrafted rookie free agent list. Then again, stranger things have happened in the National Football League. But I think we have to ask ourselves this question is, where does a guy like Franklin fit in? Now, Sean Payton says our vision for him, we see him as a Z receiver, right? So ideally, the Z is always going to be a guy who's going to be in motion quite a bit. It doesn't matter if you play Z. You're not going to be primarily the motion guy. Sean Payton has motioned a lot of different players. He's motioned the X. He's motioned the slot, or as they call, I think, the F overall in this in his system overall. But what you do see here as well, Troy Franklin's a guy that doesn't just have to line up on one side of the field, right? He's a guy that you can move around. You can put him in the slot if you want to. And his chemistry with Bo Nix, that's going to be very, very difficult to ignore early on, because how do you build comfort with a guy who doesn't necessarily have chemistry with other wide receivers? How do you get him in rhythm? Well, you have a guy he's got tremendous rhythm with. They had one of the most electrifying connections in college football in the last 2 seasons. For all the people that have concerns about Bo Nix and his arm strength and that he doesn't throw the deep ball, go watch him and Troy Franklin play at the University of Oregon the last 2 seasons. You're going to see some beautiful throws downfield by Bo Nix to Troy there. So if he's going to be the Z, he's going to move around a little bit. I do think that we're going to see Sean Payton maybe try to put him in. Like, I don't think he's going to start necessarily for the Broncos, Sayre, but I do think that maybe we see him rotate in, right? And there's nothing wrong with him being a rotational player inside the wide receiver room this upcoming season. I think it'd actually be a good thing because he can get more opportunities. And I think it kind of take the pressure off him a little bit, because you do have guys like Cortland Sutton. You have Tim Patrick. Marvin Mims is going to play a lot of what we thought to be the Jerry Jeudy role initially. So that means that Troy probably isn't anticipated to be the starter. So in my opinion, how does he factor into the wide receiver plans? Rotation role early on here with the chance, I think, to grow into a more featured role as the season goes along.
And you kind of hope that the Broncos learned from what I would determine to be a mistake last year in the way that they approached kind of getting Marvin Mims into the offensive game plan each week, right? I mean, early on in the season, we thought, man, like, if it continues to grow from here, where we were seeing week 1 to week 2 against the Commanders, if it continues to grow from here, Marvin is going to be a 1,000-yard receiver by the time the season's over. And ultimately, he just didn't get enough reps out there on the field. And so is it going to be a required package of plays each week for somebody like Troy Franklin to try to get him into the mix and see, can he at any point be a hot hand for this offense? I mean, if you do start struggling with depth at the receiver, if you go through injuries or whatnot, can he actually step into a bigger role? So I think that's where it's going to be crucial for Sean Payton and this coaching staff. Get this guy a predetermined role every single week so that he's able to have a package of plays, that he's not going to be coming in at any point during the season as like a, well, we finally need him now, we'll use him. That you want to see him involved right away, because that chemistry with Bo Nix, the ability to create after the catch, you just can't keep a guy with these kind of traits on the sideline unless he's really struggling. And that is something too that could be discussed, right? The drops at Oregon. I mean, I think he had 8 or 9 drops last year, according to Pro Football Focus. And so it's something to monitor, but you want to get him his confidence as quickly as possible, right? You want him to have a package of plays every single week and learn from that mistake. At least in my eyes, it was a mistake that you made last year with Marvin Mims.
Well, and I think that was where the frustration kind of boiled over for Broncos country. It's like, hey, like, we've seen a sample size of what Marvin can do when he's healthy on the field and he's used properly. And all of a sudden, now he's not being used. And I think that created a ton of frustration in the eyes of Broncos country, and rightfully so. I mean, I remember coming to you after one of the games. We were doing our post-game report. I'm like, man, this coaching staff, I don't know why they just refused to look Marvin's way, or if it was Russell Wilson. Like, did he not look at Marvin at times? Like, there were some times where that was the case, but overall, we talk about overall looks, usage, targets. I mean, ideally, if you're Troy Franklin, Sayre, and you're going to be in a rotational role here for Denver's offense this upcoming season behind Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, let's say Josh Reynolds, and let's also say Marvin Mims, how many targets per game do you think we could see a guy like Troy Franklin get? Like, I would estimate right now maybe 4 or 5. And if he can excel, like, let's say 2 or 3 of his catches out of 5 targets are for 10 plus yards. Like, you're moving the chains on first down. Like, you can be an impact player without putting up big numbers. I think that's where I would be okay with that, as long as the coaching staff continues to utilize him in that manner.
Yeah, you just have to hit on a high rate of those targets, right? You can't be out there cashing in on 1 out of 5 each week, right? That just won't work in terms of having a successful rookie season. If you're going to get 3 to 5 targets each week, I mean, you got to catch, at least 2 or 3 of those. And because they're
Yeah.
going to be opportunities that they're going to give him opportunities to win vertically. They're going to give him opportunities to win after the catch. We're not talking about just simply, oh, he's going to go out there and run a couple of hitches or run straight to the sideline and try to convert on a 3rd and 3 or something. They're going to try to get him those big play opportunities. And so I think it's really going to be a matter of, can you come down with the ball? Can you prove to be somebody who said, okay, we're going to give you these opportunities early in the season. Can we trust you with more as the season goes along? And like I said, if he starts to get a hot hand, he may start to take over the snap. He might force the Broncos into a little trade deadline situation, right? So I think there's interesting options with Troy Franklin here. I think the question for me is, do you really treat him like a 4th round pick, or do you treat him more as like what you graded him? Do you treat him as like a 2nd or 3rd round pick? Because from the fans' perspective now, Troy Franklin's a 4th round pick. He was a steal in the 4th round, but what is he from the team's perspective, right? I know they traded up to get him, but where is it going to be based on where they had him graded or where he was drafted in terms of kind of where we see that progression? Because he's a 2nd round player to a lot of people. So if you treat him like a 2nd round pick, man, maybe we're underestimating how quickly he's going to get on the field.
Well, I think we have to maybe look at which wide receivers that are currently on the roster right now projected ahead of him. Could he maybe push out of the lineup or the rotation at some point? And the names that come to mind, Brandon Johnson, who, had a very important role for the Broncos last season, also dealt with some injuries. Jalen Virgil, we all believe, was set to make the 53-man roster initially in the preseason before he suffered that meniscus injury right at the end of the half there, I believe it was against the 49ers. And then Lord Jordan Humphrey, who re-signed this offseason on a 1-year deal. Now, look, Lord Jordan last year became a really good special teams player for Denver. But on top of that, he actually came up big down the stretch for the Broncos offense at receiver when Cortland dealt with an injury. I mean, they had to go with him, and he obviously had that 54-yard catch and run touchdown against the Chargers. He's just a guy who works really hard, so it's not going to come easy. But with the Denver's injury history at the position, I also think there are going to be opportunities that open up regardless. But ideally, if I'm looking at any wide receivers right now on the roster, really outside of Cortland, Tim, and Marvin, it's Brandon Johnson, Jalen Virgil, Lil Jordan Humphrey. And those guys, like, you're going to have 1 of 3 opportunities here to go out there and maybe get an amplified role here inside the offense if you are Troy Franklin. So that's something I'm looking forward to seeing, maybe how that pans out for him. How do you see it going? Or do you feel like he still is going to be a little bit behind those guys there?
I think he's going to quickly jump ahead of those guys, Cody. I really do. I just feel like he has that opportunity with the Bo Nix connection. I don't think it's necessarily that they're a package deal like, oh, Bo Nix is starting, so Troy Franklin has to start. But I do think that gives him a bit of an edge because those guys do have that timing down. And I also think, I wonder how often we're going to see unique packages of combinations of guys out there. Like, how often are we going to see Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick out there? Because you kind of get the feeling like maybe the Broncos will want to ease Tim Patrick into action as opposed to just, okay, every time we have 2 or 3 wide receivers out, he's out there. I don't think that's going to be the case. So I think you're going to have guys like Josh Reynolds and Troy Franklin that can play a significant amount of snaps to keep somebody like Tim Patrick fresh and utilize him appropriately throughout the season, as well as with Marvin Mims. I mean, how you want to have Mims and Franklin out there at the same time because of that speed asset that they have. So I think it's more of to me, it's almost less of like, who could he beat, and more of like all right, what kind of personnel combinations could we have out there that could make him most effective?
Well, and we'll find out here. Broncos Country rookie minicamp is coming up next week. I'll be there to be able to cover practice. We'll see a little bit of Bo Nix to Troy Franklin. Excited to talk about it. Excited to see that connection grow a little bit further here. But Broncos Country, one thing we are going to ask here on today's episode show, what are some realistic expectations that we have for a guy like Troy Franklin in his rookie season? We'll break that down and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, let me tell you about our friends over there at Monopoly Go. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you can work together to build up each other's boards. And the more that you win together, the more awesome prizes that you unlock. And there's so much more that you can get. For example, you can get unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Plus, there's cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. And on top of that, there are hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or you heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go, it feels new and exciting every single day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. Until include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure, or they have a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything that you win on rent or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go and download it now for free on the Google Play or the App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, real quick, we just wanted to take a moment to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country, all the everyday listeners out there who make us your first listen of the day, every single day. Whether you watch us on YouTube, if you love watching us on YouTube, but you want to take us with you on the go, if you're going on a road trip, well, you can take us wherever you go, wherever you get your podcasts in audio format. So make sure you enjoy the best of both worlds there. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you engage with other members of Broncos country in the comment section. We appreciate you so much here. Diving into some realistic expectations here for Troy Franklin, reuniting with Bo Nix this upcoming season. The two obviously had a tremendous connection in the last two seasons at the University of Oregon. Can they build on that quickly here at the NFL level? You and I were talking a little bit about the different wide receivers and maybe how does he factor into the team's plan at the position with all these guys here. I do think that my overall, if I had to give a take today, Sayre, I think Troy Franklin, I think he'll see ample time within the rotation at wide receiver. And I think a big part of that has to do with his chemistry with Bo Nix. But I do think we're going to see some success early on from him inside across the middle of the field for some big gains. And I think the Broncos can continue to build on that. Not to mention, you never know, knock on wood. Hopefully everyone can stay healthy. But I do think you're going to see a lot of Troy Franklin here as a rookie in 2024, especially if Bo Nix is the starter day one. Your opinion, how do you see it maybe playing out if you had to give a projection on maybe how he's going to be used and what the expectations are for him here this upcoming season?
Well, I don't think we should expect him to eclipse 1,000 yards or 10 touchdowns or anything like that right away.
Would be
I think
nice.
that would be nice, but that would be a little unfair to heap upon him. I do think, though, look, like when you're out there any given week, I think you can expect that at any point. Like if the offense needs a jolt, I think you could expect that Troy Franklin is a guy that could come in and provide it any given week from week 1 to week 18. I think you could expect that he could come in and give you a jolt offensively, that he could come in and flip the field and really give you a momentum shifting type of play, that if you need somebody to make a play after the catch, he can do it. You get into that tight red zone. If he gets some wiggle room, Cody, he's going to be able to punch that ball. That's one of the most underrated areas, I think, of this guy's game is when you get into that tight red zone to be able to go out there and get skinny and make those plays after the catch with that speed, that burst, the nose for the end zone. That's such an underrated trait that he has. And so I think maybe you pick your spots throughout the year. Maybe you're not looking at Puka Nacua out there getting 120 some odd catches or whatever it is. But shoot, I think you have to expect that this guy can come in and give you game altering plays from day one. That's what he's good at. That's where he's really, if nothing else, that's where he excels. He can catch the deep ball. He can make plays after the catch. He's got big time speed. He knows how to find the end zone. He knows how to move the chains. So I think those are the things that you can expect from him from week 1, not necessarily saying, oh, he's going to be the number 2 receiver in 1 or 2 years. I think it's more so immediately, like he's just going to have a tremendous impact on the overall outlook of the offense.
Well, and right now, too, as we're doing the show, Courtland Sutton's still on the Broncos roster. And like we mentioned, I think it was on an episode or two ago here on the show, worth monitoring because social media does this. I happened to see it when I went to Bo Nix's profile. Courtland Sutton follows him. So that's obviously maybe a good sign that these guys have been in communication in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, Courtland is looking for a new contract. If Tim can stay healthy, there's obviously that. Marvin Mims, we know, is going to have a more featured role here. If I had to give an estimation on maybe overall targets or catches this upcoming season, Sayre, for a guy like Troy Franklin, I'd say anywhere between 35 to 49 total catches or targets, like in that range there, I feel like would be an ideal scenario for him if, in fact, your top 3 guys, and maybe including Josh Reynolds being your top 4th, like your 4th best guy there, if those guys all stay healthy and play the entire season, I think you'll see that from Troy. I think it is going to be hard to ignore maybe his yard after the catch ability. And let's say 30, if he gets 35 catches on the year, let's say 20 or 22 of those are chain movers for a first down. I think that's successful. We said it as well. You're not expecting him to come in right away and just all of a sudden put up like 10 or 11 catches a game for 140, 200 yards receiving. Like, you're going to have to find a way to get in where you fit in, especially in a wide receiver room that does feature some guys with good experience right now in the National Football League. But I do think his chemistry with Nix is going to be very, very difficult to ignore for a lot of teams. And I think more importantly, I think the Broncos are going to see that connection early on in training camp. Why not use that to your advantage and build on that? And hypothetically speaking as well, like, there, I think, will be more success in the passing game for Denver if they can run the ball more effectively than they were last year. Because, Sayre, what did teams do? They took the run game away from Denver last season, and they were like, we dare you to beat us with your arm. Like, we dare you to throw the football on us. And Denver wasn't that great from an overall passing output and productivity. And it didn't necessarily have anything to do with the wide receivers. It was more so due to the fact that the Broncos offense became one-dimensional. So if they're less than a one-dimensional offense, like, you can find a way to improve. And I think the bigger thing here, we anticipate Bo is going to be the quarterback, right? So if the offense, and this is going to be something we dive deeper into next week's episode, Lockdown Broncos, but if the Broncos offense can just play a smidge better than they did last year, specifically on third down, specifically in the red zone, I mean, Sayre, it's hard to expect that this team can't win more games than they won last year. I mean, and like I said, it may be a hot take here, but Denver's actually in a pretty solid position, I think, going forward into 2024 than most people give them credit for. And I think Troy Franklin will have an opportunity to excel a little bit if, in fact, Denver does have success offensively on the ground.
100%. And he helps with that. I mean, we didn't touch on it a ton throughout this episode, but look, a guy with that kind of vertical speed is going to prevent teams from being able to load up the box. You just can't do it when a guy can take the top off in that type of way. So he does help the running game. Just imagine if you got a personnel grouping out there with, Sutton on one side and then Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin out there as receivers, what are teams supposed to do with that? I mean, I just think that if those guys are all healthy and all playing at their best, the options are endless, and we expect a year or two jump from Marvin Mims. I know I say it all the time that development and progression in the NFL is not always linear, but you do expect him to jump because he's going to be getting more involved, and that alone should give him a huge jump. So I just think with him out there on the field, with those two guys together, the personnel possibilities help the Broncos in every possible way. And I can't wait to see it. I mean, you want to have as many weapons. The Broncos haven't had a ton of offense creators in recent years. Now you're finally starting to see that area of this team grow, and it was very necessary.
Well, I'm very curious as well. Can Sean Payton and the coaching staff learn from some of their mistakes on how they handled the Marvin Mims situation last year? Can they avoid that here with Troy Franklin and maybe some of the other wide receivers? That is a question we're going to leave with you, Broncos Country, here on today's brand new episode of Locked On Broncos. But for all you everydayers out there, we're going to continue our NFL Draft Profile series. We'll take a look at Missouri cornerback Chris Abrams-Draine. What type of impact will he have for Denver secondary as a potential rookie? Is someone's spot on the line? What type of role is he going to have? We'll break that down and much more in tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.